Jungkook refuses to sing at a wedding, but it's not just any wedding. What he said to the producer reveals a secret he's hidden for years. "I'm not singing that at his wedding," Jungkook said, voice low and tight. His jaw clenched so hard it trembled. The room stilled. The producer blinked, caught between confusion and disbelief. The track still echoed faintly through the studio speakers. A sweet, melancholic ballad written just for the ceremony, just for that moment. But Jungkook's voice, usually fluid like water, had iced over. His hands were fists on his knees. Everyone else had left for lunch. Only the sound engineer and the producer remained, and now they were looking at each other, unsure what to do, what to say, and most of all, what had just been triggered. Outside, Seoul was drowning in summer. Inside, the air conditioning buzzed. Jungkook's heart beat so loud in his ears it overpowered the song, the memory, the pressure. The request had been simple. Sing this song just once for the video that would play as the bride walked down the aisle. The groom, Taehyung. The bride, a name Jungkook hadn't dared say out loud since the news broke. He had smiled for the cameras, congratulated the couple during interviews, liked a post or two, but when the producer handed him lyrics written by Taehyung himself, everything cracked. The producer tried to reason with him. "It's just for the clip. They requested you specifically. You were his..." "Don't!" Jungkook cut in. He stood slowly, his chair scraping the studio floor. "Don't say I was his best friend. Don't say I was his brother. You weren't there. You don't know." He left the studio in silence, walking fast down the corridor where walls were covered with platinum records and memories. His reflection followed him in the glass, perfectly styled, emotionally ruined. His phone buzzed. A message from Jimin. "They still want you to come. Just say yes. Please." He didn't answer. The news of Taehyung's engagement had gone viral weeks ago, but for Jungkook, it wasn't news. It was punishment. They hadn't spoken for months. After the fight, after the night, after Jungkook said something he couldn't take back, and Taehyung walked out, never looking over his shoulder. No one else knew the truth, not even Jimin, who had guessed, who had tried to ask, who had cried when Jungkook said it was fine. Now, Jungkook stood outside the studio, eyes squinting against the harsh sunlight, remembering every word in that song because Taehyung had written it for someone else. But every note screamed Jungkook's name. He wandered the streets of Seoul, hoodie up, cap pulled low, but there was no hiding from memories. He passed a small street vendor they used to visit together. He passed the park bench where they once sat in silence for hours. He passed the apartment where he and Taehyung had once drunkenly laughed until dawn, tangled in guilt and longing. He paused there. The lights were off. The curtains closed. It felt like staring at a grave. Back at Hybe, the team scrambled. The wedding video was on a deadline. The producer panicked. Staff started calling in vocal doubles. Fans speculated why Jungkook hadn't posted anything about the upcoming wedding. Taehyung hadn't tagged him in the announcement. Army noticed. The theory started. Jungkook ignored everything. But he couldn't ignore the past. He returned to his apartment and opened a drawer filled with songs he never released. Demos, unfinished lyrics, voice notes, all about one person, one night, one impossible truth. The file labeled V had been untouched for months. He clicked it. Static. Then a guitar chord. Then his voice, low and trembling, singing a verse no one else had ever heard. It wasn't perfect, but it was raw, and the words betrayed everything he hid. That night, Jimin showed up. No warning. Just walked in with tired eyes and too much knowing. He didn't ask permission. He didn't smile. He sat across Jungkook and said, "He's not happy." Jungkook stared. "You think I don't know that? Then why not go?" "Because I won't survive it." Jimin leaned back. "You've already survived worse." The silence stretched. Jungkook turned to the window. Outside, neon lights blurred with city rain. "He asked me to sing," he said at last, voice cracking. "For her, at his wedding. That song, that thing he wrote. I read it. I read every word, and I realized he never meant it for her. Not really. Not all of it." Jimin's face twitched. "Then sing it. Let them both hear what they've tried to bury." The wedding was a week away. Rumors spread. Would Jungkook attend? Would BTS reunite? Would he sing? Fans demanded answers. But Jungkook stayed silent. Until rehearsal day. He walked into the empty hall, dressed in black, carrying only his guitar. Taehyung wasn't there. The bride wasn't there. Only the event staff, the producer, and a few familiar crew from past tours. They set the mic. Jungkook tuned his guitar. The lights dimmed. Cameras rolled. He didn't sing the song they sent. He sang his song. The one Taehyung never heard. The one Taehyung should have written back. It was fire and heartbreak, longing and fury. Every lyric sliced through the air like confession. When it ended, the producer wiped his eyes, unsure whether to applaud or apologize. "What do I tell them?" he whispered. Jungkook unplugged the mic. "Tell them I sang from the heart." The video never aired. Instead, Taehyung requested the original track. He said Jungkook declined for personal reasons. No drama, no scandal, just professionalism. But the truth cracked somewhere deeper. At the wedding, Jungkook sat at the back, uninvited but present, hidden behind sunglasses and a heavy heart. When Taehyung walked in, their eyes met for less than a second. It was enough. During the ceremony, the bride looked radiant. But when the music played, something flickered in Taehyung's expression. He didn't cry, not like he used to. After the vows, after the cheers, after the dance, Jungkook left. Jimin caught up with him outside, breathless. "You didn't say anything." "I said enough," Jungkook murmured. They stood in silence. Then Jungkook laughed, bitter, soft. "Funny, right? That the only wedding I ever imagined was mine with him." Jimin didn't respond. What could he say? Some things never get sung. Some songs stay buried. But when Jungkook told the producer, "I'm not singing that at his wedding," he wasn't refusing out of spite. He was refusing because his voice had already broken the day he lost him. Under the soft glow of the streetlight, Jungkook walked with no real direction, only his breath trailing in the chill of the night and the sound of the city muffled beneath his thoughts. His hands remained buried in his pockets, knuckles white from the tension he couldn't release. Everything around him had moved on. Seoul's skyline shimmered with indifference. Cars honked with the rhythm of a life that didn't care if his world had just collapsed. He stopped outside a flower shop that was long closed for the night. Its display window filled with ivory roses and pale blue hydrangeas, wedding colors. He stared at them for far too long. Not because they were beautiful, but because Taehyung once said he wanted those exact flowers for his future, not knowing they'd one day be for someone else. The air was damp with the promise of rain. Jungkook didn't flinch when it started falling. Instead, he let it soak him, let it erase the leftover scent of rehearsal halls and camera lights. He thought back to the moment he finished his version of the song, the one no one had expected him to sing, the one the producer had begged him not to use. But he had. He had poured years of restraint, guilt, longing, and unspoken truth into that performance. Not for the wedding, not for the couple, but for himself, for the boy he once was, for the man who had to stand and watch the love of his life promise forever to someone else. He ended up at Jimin's place, not because he planned to, but because his feet took him there like muscle memory. Jimin opened the door without a word. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, they held 1,000 things he never dared say aloud. Jungkook stepped in, dripping water onto the floor, his soaked hair clinging to his face. Jimin handed him a towel, slow and deliberate, like he was handling something fragile. Jungkook took it, said nothing, and just sat on the couch like a ghost of himself. For a long time, they didn't speak. "You know," Jimin began quietly, "he cried after watching your rehearsal." Jungkook didn't look up. "I didn't sing it for him." "I know," Jimin whispered. "But he cried anyway." Silence returned, thick and suffocating. Jimin sat across from him, watching him unravel inch by inch. The lights were dim, casting long shadows on the floor. Jungkook's fingers gripped the edge of the towel tighter. "I don't want to hate him," Jungkook said finally, voice hoarse. "But I think I do." "You don't," Jimin replied gently. "He didn't even call. He couldn't. He didn't even fight for me." Jimin leaned forward. "Maybe he did. Maybe that's what all this is. Maybe his silence times was times his fight. Maybe it's not what you wanted, but it was all he could give." Jungkook's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. He bit his lip, hard, until the metallic taste of blood grounded him. I can't do this anymore. You're already doing it. I wish he'd never told me he loved me. Jungkook said with a bitter laugh. It would have been easier to pretend I imagined it. Jimin didn't flinch. But he did, and you know it. I waited, Jimin. I waited for years. I stood there through his doubts, his fear, his silence, and now he wants me to bless his wedding with my voice? Jimin said nothing. Because there was nothing to say. Because it was unfair. Because love had never been fair. Not for them. The next day came too quickly. Jungkook stayed hidden. He declined every invitation, every reminder, every polite text from staff. The wedding was set for Saturday. Today was Thursday. And the world still expected him to sing. Taehyung hadn't reached out directly. Not a call, not a voice note, just a forwarded email with the track and schedule. The coldness of it all stung more than any insult could have. Later that night, Jungkook opened his private IG account, the one no one but Jimin followed. He posted nothing, just stared at the drafts he never uploaded. Photos with Taehyung, old Polaroids from studio nights, a blurry video where Taehyung was laughing, really laughing, and Jungkook's voice could be heard softly saying, asterisk, "Don't marry someone who won't laugh like this with you." Asterisk. He closed the app. He picked up his phone and opened a blank text thread with Taehyung's name. His fingers hovered. Asterisk. What do you want me to do? Asterisk. Delete. Asterisk. Do you even miss me? Asterisk. Delete. Asterisk. Why did you choose her? Asterisk. Delete. Asterisk. Why didn't you choose me? Asterisk. Sent. The message went through and was left unread. Jungkook slept on the couch again. The dreams weren't kind. Friday morning brought chaos. The internet buzzed with last-minute wedding updates. Dispatch leaked blurry rehearsal photos. Someone posted a list of attendees. BTS members were all expected. Jungkook was not mentioned. Fans speculated. Some defended him. Others accused him of being bitter, of being dramatic, of ruining a beautiful day. He shut it all off. Then came the knock on his door. Not Jimin. Taehyung. He looked exhausted. A little too thin. His usual designer flair replaced with something simple, almost humble. He didn't smile. Just stood there, uncertain. Eyes darting like he wanted to run. I shouldn't be here. He said, Then why are you? Taehyung licked his lips. Because you sent that message. Jungkook didn't move. So, you did read it? I read all of them. Jungkook's chest ached. Then say something. Taehyung looked like he might, but then didn't. She doesn't know, he said quietly. About us? About me asterisk, he clarified. About the part of me that loved you. Past tense. It hit like a slap. Jungkook laughed bitterly. So you came here to confess what? That you're lying to her too? Taehyung flinched. Don't do that. No, please. Enlighten me. Am I supposed to be proud? Honored? You bury me, hide me, erase everything we had, and then ask me to sing asterisk? I didn't ask, Taehyung snapped, voice rising. They did, but you didn't stop it either. I thought you'd say no. I did. They stood in silence, years of history pressing down on them. The hallway felt smaller, the walls thicker. Jungkook's breathing was sharp. She's good to me, Taehyung said like it justified everything. And I loved you, Jungkook replied, like it explained nothing. I never wanted to hurt you. You didn't, Jungkook said, stepping back. You killed, me. Taehyung's eyes shimmered. Then why are you still standing? Because I have to. The silence was unbearable. Taehyung turned to leave, then hesitated. I didn't want to love you, he said without turning around. But I did. And then he was gone. The next day, the wedding went on. Beautiful, grand, timeless. But when the bride walked down the aisle, there was no music, only silence, because Jungkook had sent a final message that morning. Asterisk. I told the producer I'm not singing that at your wedding, but I hope your heart still hears me. Asterisk. And Taehyung did. Every second of the ceremony, every word of the vow, every beat of the song that never played it, was Jungkook's voice that echoed inside him. Not the one from his throat, but the one he left behind. Underneath the canopy of soft white lights that draped across the outdoor venue, everything looked perfect. Almost too perfect, as if no one had dared to let reality seep into this day. Rows of white chairs, polished silver cutlery, pale blush florals, and a massive arch covered in ivory fabric stood ready to frame the vows that would be exchanged. Guests laughed softly, exchanged pleasantries, held champagne flutes as if nothing in the world was broken. But somewhere within that crowd, hearts were fraying, torn in places invisible to the eye, masked by tailored suits and polite smiles. Jungkook stood across the street behind tinted windows, watching it all unfold from the safety of a black van. His name was never on the list. His presence would have stirred too many questions, even more answers no one wanted to give. Jimin sat beside him, fingers nervously tapping his phone, glancing at Jungkook now and then, unsure if silence was better than saying the wrong thing. Inside the venue, Taehyung looked like a painting come to life. Black suit, open collar, no tie deliberate. His eyes scanned the space as if looking for something, someone, yet knowing deep down he wouldn't find what he needed. He greeted guests with half a smile, laughed when expected, and nodded to his mother's gentle instructions, but his thoughts remained elsewhere. The song never came. The video remained muted. And for the first time that week, no one dared to ask why. They knew, even if they didn't know. Every member of BTS could feel it. Hoseok had exchanged a glance with Namjoon. Jin's smile faltered when he noticed Jungkook was absent. Yoongi sat quietly in the back, arms folded, sunglasses never leaving his face. There were ghosts in the air, and one of them wore the shape of a man who refused to sing. Jungkook's fingers trembled, but not from nerves. His body knew something his mind hadn't admitted. He shouldn't be here. He shouldn't have come at all. But he had to see it to make it real. Because part of him still believed this was a nightmare that would end if he just opened his eyes wide enough. And part of him hoped, foolishly, painfully, that Taehyung would turn around at the altar, walk away from the aisle, and run. To him. The ceremony began. Music played, soft and haunting. Not his song. Not the one that was meant for this moment. Instead, it was a generic instrumental piece someone else had chosen. Forgettable, distant. The bride appeared, a vision of calm and grace. Jungkook's throat tightened. Every step she took was a countdown to a goodbye he never wanted to say. The closer she got to Taehyung, the harder it became to breathe. Jimin reached out, placing a hand gently over Jungkook's, grounding him. Then it happened. Taehyung's face shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a full collapse. But for someone who knew him, who had memorized every nuance of his expressions, it was enough. His jaw clenched. His eyes flickered. And for a second, just a second, they shimmered with something dangerously close to regret. He looked past the crowd, into the horizon, as if he could sense the gaze that had been on him this entire time. Jungkook held his breath. Time stilled, and then Taehyung looked back at her. He smiled, and the ceremony continued. Jungkook closed his eyes. Not to block it out, but to hold it in. Because the ache inside him wasn't loud. It was quiet, heavy, final. Later, when the sun dipped below the skyline and the reception began, Jungkook was still in the van. Jimin had tried twice to speak, but every time, he stopped himself. Finally, Jungkook broke the silence. I'm going to leave now. Back to the apartment? No! Jungkook whispered. Back to where I should have stayed. Away from all this. Jimin looked at him, brow furrowed. You don't have to disappear, Jungkook. Jungkook smiled weakly. Don't I? That night, he boarded a flight to Tokyo. No post. No update. Just a quiet exit. In the weeks that followed, fans speculated. His schedule became vague. Appearances were missed. Hybe offered rehearsed statements, solo work, reflection time, personal space. But those who really followed him, who knew the way he used his art to speak, felt the change. His music shifted. Darker tones, slower melodies, lyrics laced with heartbreak, with lines that hinted at stories too personal for fiction. Taehyung, meanwhile, resumed life as planned. Public appearances, variety shows. A honeymoon photo leaked online. He smiled in every one of them. But those who really looked, who really saw, noticed something had dulled. Not in his charm, not in his beauty, but in the light behind his eyes. One night, months later, a clip surfaced from a podcast Taehyung guest starred on. The host asked him about love, about regrets, about the one song he still couldn't listen to. And Taehyung paused, looked down, and after a long silence, simply said, "I once asked someone to sing for me. He said no. That's when I realized I'd lost more than just a voice." The internet exploded. Army pieced it together. They always did. Jungkook never responded, not directly. But the next track he released, titled Unspoken, contained one line that trended for weeks. "You asked me to bless a lie, and I was supposed to smile while bleeding." Years passed. BTS celebrated anniversaries. Reunion talks floated in the air like unfinished promises. But Jungkook and Taehyung, they remained polite, distant, professional. In interviews, they smiled when asked about each other, said kind things, shared memories, but never the present. And that song remained unreleased. Until one winter evening, when Jungkook uploaded a video at midnight. No captions, just a single take. Him, a guitar, a raw, unfiltered voice cracking through the cold. And the lyrics were unmistakable. It was the song Taehyung had written for the wedding, but rewritten. Jungkook. For the ending they never had. He never spoke of it again. He didn't need to. Because sometimes, love isn't the fairy tale with a kiss at the altar. Sometimes, love is a voice refusing to sing for the wrong story. And that, in the end, was the loudest truth Jungkook ever told. The Tokyo skyline blinked silently outside the glass walls of the penthouse, a quiet, glittering canvas to Jungkook's stillness. The apartment smelled faintly of cedarwood and coffee, though no one had visited in weeks. The studio remained untouched since his arrival, equipment gleaming, guitar resting against the wall, microphones dormant as if waiting for him to breathe life into them again. But Jungkook hadn't touched a note since he posted that video. The one where he bled out in melody. The one where he rewrote a wedding song into a funeral of everything he couldn't say in person. It had gone viral in ways he didn't anticipate. Not because it was scandalous. Not because it was polished. But because it was real. Stripped of glamour, of pretense. The world saw a man singing into a quiet room, and somehow it echoed in hearts that had never known his pain. Fans left comments like whispered prayers. Messages poured in from people who had once lost someone they still loved. From people who understood that some goodbyes aren't loud. They're soft and permanent. Jungkook read none of them. He sat most nights in silence, staring at his reflection on the black surface of his unplugged TV. The only sound, the slow ticking of a clock that didn't seem to move. Some nights he wondered if he made it all up, if Taehyung's confession in that hallway months ago was a dream. If the weight he carried was something he could eventually forget. But then he'd hear the voice, not Taehyung's, his own, repeating the line that ended everything. "You didn't fight for me," and it would break him all over again. Jimin called regularly, leaving voicemails that Jungkook never answered. Sometimes, Yoongi would send him a link to a beat, just a nudge, no words attached. Jin sent a photo once of a grilled sea bass, captioned, "Still your favorite, huh? Come home someday. We'll make it right again." Hoseok left voice notes that sounded like sunshine, never demanding anything, just letting Jungkook know the world still had room for him. Namjoon, ever the quiet pillar, sent a book. No explanation. The page he marked had one line underlined. "Even when you leave the room, your absence lingers like perfume." Jungkook wept for a long time after that. One night, there was a knock at his door. He didn't answer it. The knock came again. And again. Soft. Persistent. Jungkook moved slowly, unsure whether he wanted it to be a stranger or a ghost. But when he opened the door, it was neither. It was Taehyung, dressed in a black coat, scarf loose around his neck, hair slightly longer than the last time they saw each other. His hands were in his pockets, but his eyes were exposed. Clear. Sincere. Jungkook stood frozen, unsure whether to speak or close the door again. "I saw the video," Taehyung said quietly. Jungkook blinked. "Took you long enough. I couldn't watch it when it dropped. I was still pretending. Are you here to say thank you?" Jungkook's voice was sharp, a shield. "No," Taehyung breathed. "I'm here because I couldn't breathe anymore." Jungkook moved aside. "Let him in." The apartment was cold. Both knew it wasn't the temperature. I listened to the song again. The one I wrote for the wedding, Taehyung continued as he sat slowly on the edge of the sofa, as if unsure he deserved to sit. It sounds different now. I didn't realize how much of you I'd buried in it. Jungkook leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You buried everything? Taehyung flinched. I thought I could live with it, that I could make it work. I convinced myself that marrying her would help me forget, or fix the part of me that still belonged to you. Jungkook scoffed. Did it? No. Silence stretched between them like a tightrope. One move, and they'd both fall. I left her, Taehyung finally said. Jungkook's head lifted sharply. What? It didn't work. I couldn't lie anymore. I couldn't smile in photos knowing I destroyed something real just to protect an illusion. You think that fixes anything? Jungkook's voice cracked. You think just because you walked away from her, it erases what you did to me? No, Taehyung said, his voice soft but unwavering. I don't expect forgiveness. I came because I couldn't keep pretending we never existed. Jungkook stared at him, trying to hate him, trying to remember all the reasons he had built walls so high around himself. But Taehyung was still there, sitting like the boy he once loved, the man he still couldn't stop dreaming about.
I hate that I still want to believe you, Jungkook whispered. Taehyung stood slowly, walked toward him, stopping just close enough for the tension to thrum between their bodies. You don't have to believe me, just let me say it. Jungkook's voice was barely audible. Say what? That I'm sorry, that I never stopped loving you, that I was a coward, that every moment since I said I do felt like a betrayal not just to you, but to myself. Jungkook's fists tightened at his sides. Taehyung stepped closer. I still remember what you wore the first time we wrote together in the studio. I still hear your laugh when I fall asleep. I still, God, Jungkook, I still wait for your voice in every damn song I write. I'm tired of hiding. I don't want to hide anymore. Jungkook looked up, eyes filled with heat and disbelief. Then why didn't you come sooner? Taehyung's lip trembled, because I thought I didn't deserve to. A silence followed that was not empty but full, of years of loss, of music, of pain, of love. And then Jungkook moved. He stepped forward, slow at first, as if walking through water, and when he reached Taehyung, he didn't kiss him. He didn't cry. He just leaned his forehead against his chest and exhaled the breath he'd been holding for years. They stood like that for what felt like forever. Two people who had once shared everything, who had been torn apart by timing, fear, expectations, pride. Now they stood again, still not fixed but less broken. Taehyung slowly lifted his hand and touched the back of Jungkook's neck, drawing him closer, not demanding anything, just presence. When Jungkook finally spoke, it was muffled against Taehyung's shoulder. What now? Taehyung's voice cracked. I don't know, but I don't want to run anymore. That night they didn't sleep, not in the way people assume. They talked about everything, about the night it all fell apart, about the silence that followed, about the song, about the wedding, about the impossible choice of love in a world that demanded perfection. They didn't make promises, they didn't talk about the future. But when the sun rose over Tokyo, spilling light across the studio floor, they sat side by side at the piano. And this time when Jungkook sang, Taehyung harmonized. Not for the world, not for a wedding, but for each other. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The keys beneath their fingertips felt warmer than the air between them, weighted with memory and hesitant forgiveness. Jungkook's voice moved like dusk spilling over water, soft, worn, yet trembling with the echo of something deeper than apology, something closer to surrender. And Taehyung, quiet at first, joined with a harmony that slipped in like breath held too long, uncertain whether it had permission to be released. Together they created a sound that was not clean, not perfect, but honest. It didn't need polish. It didn't need structure. It was them. Two halves of a song never finished. Two voices that once diverged but found their way back through dissonance and pain. The chords fell away eventually, but their closeness remained. Taehyung's shoulder brushed against Jungkook, and neither moved. The city outside stirred awake, but the world inside that room felt like a secret folded in time. No cameras, no lights, No company managers or staff running schedules, just them. Jungkook blinked slowly, letting his fingers hover above the keys as if to touch them again might shatter the spell. Taehyung finally leaned back, hand over his chest, his breathing uneven. For a long time he said nothing, and neither did Jungkook, both afraid that if words returned, so would everything they had just tried to unwrite. "I don't know how to fix it," Taehyung whispered, almost like he was confessing to a priest rather than the person he wronged. Jungkook turned to look at him fully for the first time since that night began, and what he saw wasn't the polished version of the man the world adored. Not the headline image, not the brand ambassador, not the husband who left. He saw the boy he first shared headphones with backstage when they were barely more than teenagers. He saw the artist who once scribbled lyrics about fear and freedom in the margins of airplane napkins. He saw the friend who used to sneak him midnight snacks when training got too hard, who used to laugh too loud at his jokes, who once kissed him beneath a busted light in a dim hallway, and then ran like he'd set something on fire. "I'm not asking you to fix it," Jungkook replied quietly, eyes locked to Taehyung's. "But if you stay, you need to mean it." "I wouldn't be here if I didn't." "You've been here before," Jungkook said, not bitter, just tired. "You came back once. You left again. What makes now any different?" Taehyung looked down, lips parting slightly before pressing shut again. His jaw tensed, then released. "Because this time," he began, lifting his gaze slowly, "I'm not afraid to lose everything else." Jungkook's breath hitched. That was the truth he had waited for. Not grand declarations, not perfect timing, but the raw, uncomfortable honesty that Taehyung had always run from, that he had finally come to deliver. Still, Jungkook hesitated. The heart, after all, does not forget how to shield itself once broken. Even the softest touch can be mistaken for a threat if the wound is deep enough. Taehyung seemed to sense this. He didn't close the gap. He didn't push. Instead, he stood and crossed to the window, arms folding over his chest as the light bathed him in the faint blue of morning. Jungkook watched his back, the way his spine straightened, the way his fingers tapped nervously against his own skin. He remembered how that back had once walked away from him, how it had stood before a crowd and promised love to someone else. But now it stood here, unmoving, unguarded. And maybe that meant something. "I didn't just leave her," Taehyung said suddenly, voice calm but bruised. "I told her everything. About us. About the way I felt every time you walked into a room. About the night before the wedding when I couldn't breathe, thinking of how I'd pushed you away, how I wrote you out of a life that wasn't even mine yet." Jungkook swallowed hard. "She cried," Taehyung continued. "But she told me something I'll never forget. She said, 'Go find him. If he's the person you sing about in your sleep, you owe him more than silence.'" He turned around then, eyes shimmering, raw and exposed. "So I'm here. Not because I think I deserve you, but because I want to start from nothing, from silence, from one note at a time." Jungkook didn't answer right away. He stood, slow, measured. The room suddenly felt small. He approached Taehyung, stopping just inches from him, close enough to hear the staggered beat of the older man's heart. He searched his face for signs of doubt. There were none. And so, for the first time in what felt like years, Jungkook reached out. Not in desperation, not in fury, not in confusion, but in trust. His hand cupped the side of Taehyung's neck. "Then stay," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "but don't run again." Taehyung nodded once, his eyes closing at the touch. "I won't." The weeks that followed were not perfect. There were missteps, old arguments that resurfaced in the quiet, flashbacks neither could control, and yet there was progress. Mornings where Jungkook cooked too much food, evenings where Taehyung fell asleep on the floor with a pencil still in his hand. Music returned slowly, sometimes through humming, sometimes through unfinished lyrics scribbled on receipts or phone notes. They didn't rush a project. They didn't plan a comeback. They lived together, in that strange little limbo between reconciliation and rediscovery. News outlets speculated. Photos surfaced. Two shadows leaving a ramen bar in Shibuya, a blurred image of Jungkook's hand resting on the back of a familiar jacket, A sound check where Jungkook improvised a harmony that sounded like a reply to a melody Taehyung had written years ago. Fans noticed. ARMY always did. But for once there were no theories, just support. Whispers of "I hope they're okay" and "maybe this is healing." For the first time, the world seemed to allow them space to breathe. Then came the offer. A producer in Seoul reached out to Jungkook and Taehyung simultaneously. He wanted to do a documentary on artistic revival, a story of reconnection through music. Both hesitated. Neither wanted spectacle, but the idea lingered. Taehyung brought it up over coffee one morning. "What if we told our story in music?" Jungkook looked up from his mug, expression unreadable. No interviews, no cameras, just a concept album, 10 tracks, one for every moment we broke or rebuilt. Jungkook said nothing for a while, then simply, "Only if we call it the song I refuse to sing." Taehyung's smile was small, perfect. The writing sessions were intense, cathartic. Some days they ended with breakthroughs, melodies that melted the air with truth. Other days ended with doors closing and silence stretching long into the night. But they never left. Not this time. They fought. They created. They healed. The final track was the hardest. Track 10, The Wedding. They sat in the same room where Taehyung had once confessed, knees brushing as they listened to the old draft. Jungkook opened a notebook, hand trembling. Taehyung placed his fingers over Jungkook, without a word. They began. This time the song did not mourn. It remembered. It forgave. It closed a chapter not with rage, but with resolution. When the album dropped, it shattered charts not because it was a BTS project, but because it was raw, unfiltered emotion made art. Critics called it the most vulnerable body of work from either of them. Fans cried. People who had never heard their story felt it through every verse, every harmony, every echo of pain turned into something beautiful. And when they performed it live, just once at a small venue in Tokyo, Jungkook did sing that song. The one he once refused. But now it was no longer a funeral. It was a rebirth. And in the quiet after the final note, Taehyung reached for Jungkook's hand. He didn't have to ask. Jungkook didn't need to answer. The music had already said it all. The crowd had long dispersed, the dim amber lights of the intimate Tokyo venue flickering down to a final hum of silence, yet neither of them moved from the center of the stage. Jungkook still held the last note inside his chest, as if afraid letting it go would undo everything they had rebuilt. Taehyung's hand rested on the edge of his guitar, not strumming, not trembling, just there, still and warm like an anchor. It wasn't applause that mattered anymore. It wasn't the praise or the record numbers or the headlines that began forming minutes after the stream cut off. It was the stillness, the way the air didn't ache anymore, the way their voices no longer collided like clashing swords, but melted into one another like rain finding its ocean. Jungkook turned to him, and Taehyung met his gaze, not with apology this time, but with belonging. It was in the way their eyes didn't flinch, the way the space between them no longer needed filling. It was in the breath Jungkook released, the one he'd held since the day Taehyung said, "I do" to someone else. Now that breath was free. Later backstage, the team didn't say much. Jimin had tears on his cheeks but masked it with his usual grin as he handed over towels and bottles of water. Yoongi simply nodded, eyes low, letting his hand press briefly to Jungkook's shoulder before moving on. Namjoon whispered something to Taehyung that made his throat close. Jin gave Jungkook a crooked smile and said, "You did good, kid." And Hoseok took a blurry Polaroid and said nothing, because he didn't need to. Their presence alone stitched something together that had long since frayed. They left after everyone else. No rush, no handlers, just the two of them slipping into the night like they had never been apart. The streets were quieter now. The city's pulse slowed into a hush, neon signs blinking half-heartedly, a cool wind pressing gently into their coats. Neither spoke for a long while. Their footsteps fell into rhythm on their own. Jungkook broke the silence first, voice low. "Do you think it was enough?" Taehyung turned his head, watching him through tired eyes. For who? For us, Jungkook answered, gaze flicking toward the sidewalk cracks. Taehyung slowed, then stopped entirely beneath a street lamp that buzzed gently overhead. He looked at Jungkook like he wanted to memorize this version of him, the unarmored, unfiltered man who no longer needed to raise his voice to be heard. That wasn't a song, Taehyung said. It was a confession. And I heard every word. They stood there, two silhouettes softened by the quiet hum of a city that had given them fame, separation, and now, maybe, redemption. Taehyung reached for Jungkook's hand again, slower this time, not out of fear but reverence. Their fingers touched, intertwined, and Jungkook didn't pull away. He didn't speak, but his grip tightened just slightly, and that was more than enough. Over the next few days, the world buzzed. The album, the song I refused to sing, dominated every chart, trended in every country, became a cultural moment, not just a release. Critics dissected lyrics. Fans speculated over timelines. Headlines screamed reconciliation, comeback, redemption. But none of that touched the core of what had happened, because only they knew what it meant to step back into each other's gravity and not spin out again. Only they knew the silence that followed the curtain call was louder than any stadium scream. They returned to the studio quietly, without fanfare, and continued writing, not for an album, not for profit, but because it was all they knew how to do together. The music became the language they trusted most. There were days they didn't speak, only exchanged melodies across the room. Days they laughed until they cried. Days they argued. Days they broke and rebuilt and started again. One morning, Jungkook stood by the window, shirt loose, hair wet from a shower, staring at the mist curling through the Tokyo skyline. Taehyung watched him from behind, arms folded, a quiet calm in his chest he hadn't felt in years. "You're different now," he murmured. Jungkook didn't turn around. "So are you." "You forgive slower," Taehyung added. "And you lie less." Taehyung smiled faintly. "Fair." Another pause. "Do you still dream about it?" Jungkook asked. "The wedding?" "Sometimes," Taehyung admitted. "Not in pain, not anymore. It feels like watching someone else's life now, one I borrowed and returned too late." Jungkook exhaled. "I used to dream I stood up in the middle of it, that I yelled, that I ran down the aisle and dragged you out before you could say her name." Taehyung stepped closer, wrapping his arms gently around Jungkook from behind, resting his cheek against his shoulder. "And now?" "Now," Jungkook whispered, "now I don't dream about saving you. I dream about you choosing me the first time." Taehyung's arms tightened. "Then let me choose you now, over and over, until it rewrites every time I didn't." They didn't rush anything. Not labels, not announcements, not promises wrapped in ribbons. They simply existed, together, slowly reintroducing themselves to a version of love that wasn't stolen in silence but carved in daylight. They traveled, quiet towns, seaside villas, places untouched by gossip and cameras. In one city, they danced to a street musician's violin on a cobbled sidewalk. In another, they sat under an umbrella in the rain sharing noodles and laughter. Fans occasionally spotted them, posted blurred photos, captions filled with joy and hope, no longer scandal or speculation. One day, a letter arrived. From her. Taehyung recognized the handwriting immediately. Jungkook watched from the kitchen as he read it, expression unreadable. When he finished, he folded it slowly and placed it face down on the table. "She said she forgives me," Taehyung murmured. "She's getting married again. Said she found someone who doesn't live in the shadow of another name." Jungkook nodded. "I'm glad." "She thanked me for loving you, even if it came too late." That night Taehyung wrote her back, thanked her, wished her joy. He didn't say he was sorry again. She had already absolved him. And maybe, somewhere in the quiet distance of a life once shared, they both found peace in the parting. In the spring, they returned to Seoul. Not to stay, but to show the city they once ran from, that they weren't afraid anymore. They held a private showcase. No press, no live stream, just a small room filled with familiar faces, fellow artists, close friends. There, under warm lights, they performed a new piece. One not on the album, one they never released. A song that didn't mourn or confess, but celebrated. A song called Found. Jungkook sang the first verse alone. Taehyung entered on the second. And by the bridge, their voices rose together, no longer searching for harmony because they were the harmony. And when the last note faded, there was no need for a standing ovation. There were only tears, smiles, closure, hope. After the showcase, they walked out into the night, fingers brushing, shoulders bumping, laughter spilling down the darkened street like moonlight made sound. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd said no at the altar?" Taehyung asked, looking up at the sky. "No," Jungkook replied without hesitation. "Why not?" "Because it wouldn't have meant what this means now," he said, slipping his fingers through Taehyung's. "You came back, willingly, honestly. That's more powerful than any runaway groom fantasy." Taehyung smiled, eyes soft. "Then let me keep coming back. Every day." "You better," Jungkook teased. And he did. Every sunrise, every lyric, every silence filled with unspoken "I'm still here." They didn't need a wedding. They didn't need rings or formal vows or champagne toasts. Because they had something stronger now. A song born of heartbreak, transformed by truth, and carried by two voices that finally chose to stay in tune. Forever didn't need to be shouted. Sometimes it only needed to be sung. The scent of spring returned quietly, without warning, brushing against the corners of the city like a lover who no longer needed to knock. Jungkook stood at the edge of the old studio rooftop where they had first recorded together years ago, the same one where they once watched the city pulse beneath them like a living thing, while their dreams burned higher than any skyline. The breeze carried something sweeter now. Cherry blossoms stirring in their final bloom, distant horns blending with the occasional birdsong, and faint laughter from pedestrians below that reminded him the world was still moving, even when he had stopped. He didn't feel frozen anymore. Not like that day in the van watching Taehyung walk toward a future that didn't include him. Not like the night after the song went viral and he sat in the dark wondering if barring his soul in melody had been brave or foolish. He breathed deeply, feeling the wind press against his skin like permission. Taehyung came up behind him quietly, just a rustle of fabric and warmth drawing near, no words, no announcement. He leaned against the railing beside him, letting his arm brush gently against Jungkook as he stared into the horizon that had once seemed so unreachable. "You know," Taehyung murmured, eyes half-lidded in the sunlight, "we never celebrated." Jungkook tilted his head slightly. "Celebrated what?" "Surviving," Taehyung said, his voice a gentle vibration through the silence. "Choosing not to vanish, choosing each other." Jungkook laughed under his breath, low and soft. "Feels like surviving was the only thing we were good at for a while." Taehyung turned, eyes tracing Jungkook's profile with a gaze so reverent it made the younger man's shoulders tense with awareness. "Now I want to be good at living," Taehyung said, the confession so bare it nearly startled them both. Jungkook didn't reply. Instead, he turned and leaned his forehead gently against Taehyung's shoulder, letting the warmth of the moment soak through him like sunlight into skin. They stayed that way for a long while, letting memory and forgiveness braid themselves into the quiet between heartbeats. Later, back inside, the studio buzzed softly with the ambient hum of idle monitors and half-finished arrangements. Jungkook scrolled through voice memos on his phone, most of them named with dates and half-coded words, before finding one titled simply February. He clicked it. Taehyung's voice filled the space, bare, imperfect, a recording from weeks ago when they were still finding how to breathe in the same room again. It was a melody built on doubt and devotion, a line about time slipping through fingers, a verse about trying again after the storm. They listened in silence, not because they were avoiding words, but because the music said enough. After it faded, Taehyung picked up a guitar and strummed the first chord, no plan in mind, no structure, just instinct. Jungkook joined him seconds later, voice soft, eyes closed, the harmony rising not for performance, not for charts, not for fame, but for healing. The lyrics came unpolished, falling from lips without filter, something about stolen chances, about watching love from behind a glass wall, about finally unlocking the door and stepping through. Neither of them wrote it down. Some songs weren't meant to be captured. Some songs were only meant to be felt once and remembered forever. In the days that followed, they traveled again. Small cities, unfamiliar streets, hands clasped when no one was looking, and sometimes even when they were. They no longer flinched at the click of cameras or the way strangers stared. There was no need to explain. Their silence had once been mistaken for secrecy, but now it simply read as peace. In Osaka, they walked through an old bookstore where Taehyung bought a poetry collection in a language he barely read just because the cover reminded him of a sketch Jungkook once made in the margin of his lyric notebook. In Busan, they sat by the sea, letting salt air fill their lungs as Jungkook rested his head against Taehyung's knee, eyes closed, fingers tracing idle circles into his palm. No words, just presence. At night, in a modest ryokan tucked between forests and mountains, they bathed together in silence, steam curling around them like breath made visible, scars bare and untouched by shame. Jungkook leaned against the edge of the tub, water clinging to his lashes, and whispered, "Did you ever think we'd make it here?" Taehyung reached across, brushing a droplet from his cheek. "I didn't think we'd survive what we became." Jungkook's eyes opened slowly. "And now?" "Now," Taehyung said, pressing a kiss to his temple, "I don't think I can survive without what we are." Their love didn't need announcing. It unfolded quietly like petals opening at dusk, in moments no one else would ever see. Taehyung singing off-key in the morning, shirtless and barefoot, dancing across the kitchen while Jungkook made coffee with sleep still in his eyes. Jungkook curling into Taehyung's side on long train rides, the steady beat of the older man's heart guiding him into peace. They stopped checking the news, stopped explaining their whereabouts. They were not hiding. They were just living. One evening, after a long recording session, they returned to the rooftop. The city sparkled beneath them like it was listening. Jungkook reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't kneel, didn't make a speech. He simply opened it and held it out. Inside was a ring, not diamond, not flashy, just a simple band engraved with a lyric from their first song together. Taehyung blinked, eyes stinging. "Is this what I think it is?" Jungkook nodded, jaw tight. "It's not for a wedding," he said. "It's not for the world, it's for you, for us. Because even when I hated you, I never stopped carrying you in everything I did." Taehyung took the ring, sliding it onto his finger with trembling hands. He leaned in and kissed him, slow and aching, like the first time and the last all at once. They returned to Seoul months later, walking through familiar doors with unfamiliar courage. HYBE staff greeted them like ghosts who had come back different. They no longer deferred, no longer asked for permission to be themselves. In meetings, they sat beside each other without explanation. When asked about the album, they simply said, it was for closure. When asked if they'd collaborate again, they said, we never stopped. The studio became home again, but it no longer haunted them. It echoed now with laughter, with the sound of two people who had lost and found and lost again and still chose to stay. One night, they hosted a private session just for close friends and family. Jungkook's parents were there, Taehyung's too. Jimin cried through half the set. Yoongi filmed the whole thing but never posted it. Jin made a toast. Hoseok DJ'd the afterparty. And in the middle of the room, Jungkook and Taehyung danced slowly to a song no one else knew, one they hadn't released. One they wrote just for this night, just for this life. As the years passed, they aged with quiet grace. Albums came and went. Fame still touched their lives but never again owned them. They opened a small music academy together, tucked into a quiet district where they taught young artists not just how to sing, but how to survive the silence between songs, how to stay soft in a world that demanded noise, how to love without apology. Sometimes fans would catch glimpses of them walking hand in hand, older now, softer, still in love. But the world no longer asked questions, because the music had answered them all. And on the rare nights when they returned to the rooftop where everything began, they'd sit beneath the stars, sharing a blanket and a bottle of wine, listening to old demos and laughing over how young they once sounded. Jungkook would rest his head on Taehyung's shoulder and whisper, "Thank you for coming back." And Taehyung would smile, kissing the crown of his head. "Thank you for still being here." They never did have a wedding, never needed one. Because the song he once refused to sing had already become there forever. Not just a performance, not just a moment, but a promise, rewritten, redeemed, and sung side by side. Always. The rain had started to fall again, not in heavy bursts, but in a steady whisper, the kind that made you slow down without realizing it. Jungkook stood just inside the doorway of their music studio, watching droplets trail down the glass like thoughts he didn't dare say out loud. Behind him, the gentle thrum of voice filtered through the hallway, a low hum as he tuned his guitar without urgency. Everything in their life had softened. The tension that once gripped their bodies like armor had dissolved into something gentler, something lived in, like the way voice no longer cracked when he spoke about that day at the wedding, or the way hands no longer trembled when reaching for him in public. They had built this space together, wood floors marked by scuffing from dance rehearsals, windows that welcomed the city instead of shutting it out, walls that had heard every lyric born out of sorrow and survival. But what mattered most were the silences, the comfortable kind, the ones that didn't demand to be filled, just shared. Pressed his forehead lightly to the glass and closed his eyes, feeling the cool pain against his skin, remembering how many nights he'd stood alone just like this, wondering if loving someone so deeply was meant to hurt forever. But now there was no ache in his chest, no bitterness twisting beneath his ribs, only breath, only presence, only now. Stepped into the doorway behind him, voice still soft from rehearsal. "You always get quiet when it rains," smiled faintly without turning around. "It reminds me of the first time we said nothing and understood everything." Leaned against the frame beside him, his fingers grazing the edge of sleeve. "Was that the rooftop after the show?" "No," whispered. "It was the night you left and didn't look back. That silence taught me everything about your heart." The words weren't cruel, they were gentle. A truth spoken without the intent to wound. Didn't flinch. He nodded slowly as if accepting a gift rather than a reprimand. "And now," turned to him, finally meeting his gaze, "now your silence means peace, not absence." They didn't kiss, didn't touch, just stood there as the rain murmured outside and their past no longer echoed in their bones like a threat. It lived there now like a story already told, a scar that no longer bled. Reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope, slightly worn, the edges softened by fingers that had held it too many times. "She wrote again," he said, holding it out. "Didn't take it. Do you want me to read it?" "No," replied, voice even. "I think I wanted you to see it. To know I still carry it even after all this time." Gaze lingered on the envelope. "Does it say she regrets marrying you?" Shook his head. "No, she says she's grateful, that because of everything she found the kind of love that didn't ask her to hide." Lips curved slowly. "Then she understood what we couldn't back then." "She did," murmured. "But we understand now." That night, they returned to their apartment and cooked dinner together like they always did, slicing vegetables too slowly, scolding him gently before taking over, laughter simmering between them like something delicious and earned. After they ate, poured 2 glasses of wine and joined on the balcony, where the rain had eased into a mist, the air thick with that quiet intimacy only cities could offer when the rest of the world finally slept. They didn't speak for a long time, letting the sounds of tires on wet pavement and distant music rise to meet the hush between them, then slowly leaned his head against shoulder. "What do we do now?" he asked, not out of fear but curiosity. "We keep living," said simply. "And if life tries to break us again," whispered, kissed his temple and replied, "then we'll write another song." Weeks passed, then months. The academy flourished. Young artists came and went, some wide-eyed with talent, some broken by the world's cruelty, but all of them left changed. Because they didn't just teach music, they taught survival. They taught what it meant to sing even when your voice shook, what it meant to hold a note even when the person you once sang it for no longer listened. They shared the story in fragments, never the full tale, never in one sitting, but through melodies, through lyrics, through the way their hands would find each other when speaking about heartbreak, not to relive it, but to anchor it in something healed. One day, a young student asked them if the song I refused to sing was real, if the heartbreak in it belonged to them. Looked at who smiled and answered, "Every note we've ever sung is real, but that one was our turning point." Our truth, added. And now, said softly, we sing because we made it through. That night they went home and pulled out the dusty box of demo tapes they never finished, sitting cross-legged on the floor, letting old voices fill the room. There were mistakes in the recordings, wrong notes, forgotten lyrics, but there was youth in them too. Hope. They laughed until they cried, not because of what they lost, but because of how far they'd come. Years blurred into the kind of time that doesn't leave marks but roots. They aged in small ways, smiles carved deeper, shoulders less tense, quiet more frequent. But their love remained loud in the ways that mattered. In the way left the porch light on when stayed late at the studio. In the way pressed his cheek to chest each morning before the world awoke. They never married. They never needed to. Love, for them, wasn't measured in ceremonies or rings, but in the music they never stopped writing together. And on their final stage, years later, in a concert unannounced and intimate, they performed the song I refused to sing one last time. The audience was quiet. Many had grown with them. Many remembered the headlines, the heartbreak, the redemption. But that night, as their voices rose in tandem, no one heard pain. They heard victory. They heard survival. They heard love. And when the lights dimmed and the applause faded and they stepped off the stage into the dark wings, reached for hand and held it firmly, whispering, "I'm glad you came back." Leaned in close and whispered back, "I never left. I was just learning how to be yours properly." And the world, though it spun on, would remember them not as idols who faltered, but as voices that once shattered and then sang louder than ever from the cracks. Because love, when chosen again and again, becomes the strongest harmony of all. And some songs, even the ones once refused, are simply waiting for the right time to be sung.